You probably heard that sound in your head before I even finished the sentence. It is the sound of the 90s. It is the sound of the early 2000s. At one point in history, that simple monophonic tune was played nearly 2 billion times a day. It was the anthem of an empire. We are talking about Nokia, a company so dominant that, in 2007, held 50% of the global market share for mobile phones. Let that sink in. 1 out of every 2 phones sold on planet Earth was a Nokia. They were richer than the government of their home country. They were untouchable. Their devices were considered indestructible memes of engineering. And yet, in less than 6 years, that empire didn't just decline. It evaporated. It went from a market value of $150 billion to being sold for scraps at barely $7 billion. How does a titan fall that fast? The official story is that they were too slow. They missed the smartphone wave. They ignored the iPhone. They were arrogant. But there is another story. A darker theory that has circulated in tech forums and business schools for over a decade. It suggests that Nokia didn't just die of natural causes. It suggests that Nokia was murdered from the inside. This is the story of the burning platform, a billion-dollar gamble. The man accused of being the biggest Trojan horse in corporate history? To understand the murder, you first have to understand the victim. Before the fall, Nokia was not just a phone company. It was a chaotic, brilliant, innovative powerhouse. They created the first mass-market GSM phone. They created the first smartphone communicator while Apple was still trying to figure out colored iMacs. By the mid-2000s, they had the best supply chain in the world. They could pump out new models faster than anyone else could design them. But looking back, the cracks were already there. Nokia was running on an operating system called Symbian. If you used a phone in the mid-2000s, you'll remember it. It was functional, but it was clunky. It was a nightmare of code that had been patched together over years. Developers hated it. But Nokia executives didn't care because the money was rolling in. Then came January 9th, 2007. Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco and pulled the iPhone out of his pocket. At Nokia headquarters, the executives laughed. They literally laughed. They looked at the iPhone and said it costs too much. It has number 3G, and the battery life is terrible. They said people need physical keyboards to write emails. They treated the iPhone like a toy. That was their first mistake. But their second mistake was far more fatal. By 2010, the laughter had stopped. The iPhone was a cultural phenomenon. Google had launched Android, which was spreading like wildfire on Samsung and HTC devices. Nokia was bleeding. Their market share was dropping and their stock price was sliding. The board of directors panicked. They realized they needed a change in leadership. They needed an outsider, someone who could shake up the Finnish culture and compete with Silicon Valley. They went through a list of candidates and settled on a man named Stephen Elop. This decision would seal their fate. Stefan Elop was not just any executive. He was a former executive at Microsoft. He was the head of the Microsoft Business Division, responsible for Office and other massive products. When he was hired as the CEO of Nokia in September 2010, the tech world was optimistic. They thought, here is a software guy coming to fix a hardware company. It made sense. But almost immediately, things started to get weird. Elop didn't just try to fix Nokia. He set it on fire. In February 2011, Elop issued an internal memo to all Nokia employees. It is now famous as the Burning Platform Memo. In this letter, he told a story about a man working on an oil rig in the North Sea. The rig catches fire. The man has a choice: stay on the burning platform and burn to death, or jump 30 meters into the freezing dark ocean. The man jumps. He survives. Elop told his employees that Nokia was standing on a burning platform. He said they were surrounded by a blazing fire of competitors like Apple and Google.
Oh.
He said they had to jump.
Now, on the surface, this sounds like a great rallying cry.
A CEO motivating his troops. But in the business world, this memo was a disaster. Why? Because by calling his own company a burning platform, he effectively told the entire world that Nokia products were garbage. He admitted that their current lineup was obsolete. Sales of existing Nokia phones collapsed overnight. Why would anyone buy a Symbian phone if the CEO just said the platform is burning? He destroyed his own revenue stream before he even had a new product to sell. This is known in business as the Osborne effect, and Elop committed it on a global scale. But the real conspiracy begins with the jump itself. If Nokia was going to jump off the Symbian platform, where would they land? They had two logical choices. Option A was Android. Google was practically begging Nokia to join the Android ecosystem. If Nokia, with its legendary hardware, had adopted Android in 2011, they would have likely crushed Samsung. They would have become the premier Android phone maker. Option B was MeeGo. This was Nokia's own next-generation operating system. It was actually good. It was modern, swipe-based, and loved by engineers. They had a phone ready to launch called the N9, but Elop didn't choose Android, and he killed MeeGo. Instead, he chose option C, Windows Phone. This is where the Trojan horse theory catches fire. Stephen Elop, the former Microsoft executive, decided to bet the entire future of Nokia exclusively on Microsoft's Windows Phone operating system, a system that, at the time, had almost zero market share. It was a system that lacked apps, lacked developer support, and was completely unproven. The deal was structured in a way that Nokia would receive billions in marketing support from Microsoft. But in exchange, Nokia became dependent entirely on Microsoft. They could not make Android phones. They were locked in. The tech world was baffled. Vic Gundatra, a Google executive at the time, tweeted a simple hashtag, "Two turkeys do not make an eagle." He was right. Before we get to the tragic end of this story, I want to take a quick second to ask you something. We are digging into the lost history of tech every single week on this channel. If you want to see more stories about corporate wars, failed empires, and the secrets behind the gadgets we use, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing these scripts to life. Okay. From 2011 to 2013, Nokia tried. They released the Lumia series. And honestly, the phones were beautiful. The cameras were ahead of their time. The build quality was classic Nokia, but the software was the anchor. No one wanted Windows Phone because it didn't have Instagram. It didn't have YouTube. It didn't have the games people wanted. Developers didn't want to build apps for Windows Phone because no one was buying the phones. It was a vicious cycle. Nokia's market share didn't just drop. It fell off a cliff. They went from dominating the world to having less than 3% of the smartphone market. The company was hemorrhaging cash. They were selling off their headquarters. They were firing thousands of employees. And all the while, Stephen Elop stayed the course. He refused to have a plan B. He refused to look at Android. By late 2013, Nokia was on its knees. They were practically bankrupt. The stock price had crashed from nearly $40 a share down to below $4. The company was worth a fraction of what it was before Elop arrived. And then the savior appeared. Or, depending on how you look at it, the conqueror. Microsoft offered to buy Nokia's devices and services division. The price, a mere $7.2 billion. To put that in perspective, Microsoft bought Skype for $8.5 billion. They bought a historic phone manufacturer for less than they paid for a video chat app. And guess who negotiated the deal? Stephen Elop. And guess where Stephen Elop went after the deal closed? He went right back to Microsoft as an executive vice president. He even received a $25 million bonus for closing the deal. This is the smoking gun for the conspiracy theorists. The narrative writes itself. Microsoft wanted to enter the mobile hardware game to compete with Apple. They couldn't build a phone company from scratch. So, did they send one of their own into Nokia to sabotage the stock price, destroy the company's value, and drive it into the arms of Microsoft for a bargain price? It looks suspicious. It looks like a corporate hit job. Under Elop, Nokia lost 90% of its stock value in 3 years. If that was incompetence, it was incompetence of a staggering historic magnitude. However, we have to look at the other side. Not everyone believes Elop was a secret agent. Many business analysts argue that Nokia was already dead before Elop arrived. They just didn't know it yet. They argue that the culture at Nokia was so toxic and slow that they never would have succeeded with Android anyway because Samsung was already too far ahead. They say Elop took a gamble on Windows because he thought a third ecosystem could exist. He thought being a big fish in a small Microsoft pond was better than being just another fish in the Google Ocean. It is possible that this wasn't malice. It is possible it was just the result of a man who only knew the Microsoft way of doing things, trying to force a square peg into a round hole. But the aftermath suggests that if it was a plan, it was a bad one. Microsoft's acquisition of Nokia was a total failure. A few years later, under new CEO Satya Nadella, Microsoft wrote off the entire purchase. They shut it down. They fired the staff. They killed the Lumia brand. The billions they spent went up in smoke. Elop eventually left Microsoft again. The Trojan horse, if he was one, didn't even win the war for his masters. Today, Nokia still exists. They build network infrastructure, the 5G towers that power our world. They are a profitable, quiet B2B company. And the phone brand has been licensed out to HMD Global, making generic Android phones that rely on nostalgia. But the giant is gone. The company that connected people, the company that put a phone in the pocket of the developing world, was dismantled in 36 months. Was Stephen Elop a villain sent to destroy a European tech giant? Or was he just a captain who steered a sinking ship into an iceberg while trying to save it? History is written by the victors, and in the mobile wars, Apple and Google won. Nokia is just a cautionary tale. A lesson that no matter how big you are, no matter how unbreakable you think you are, if you stop innovating, or if you trust the wrong person, you can lose it all.